The Curse of Ahmen Ra. Altair stood at the rail of the steamer, smiling down into the water. When the boat docked in New York 4 days hence, he and his three comrades would be rich men. His smile grew as he thought of the warnings they had received before they left on the expedition. The horror on the faces of the natives when he and his companions had broken into the tomb and removed the ancient jewels. The warning from the overseer that the ancient curse laid upon the grave by the long-dead king would claim them all. Well, here they were on the way home, the treasure intact, and the four of them in the best of health and spirits. True, the men had deserted, and they had had a devil of a time reaching the coast, but that could hardly be called a curse, merely native superstition having full sway. He yawned and stretched with a self-satisfied feeling of well-being and decided to turn in and join the others. It was while he was opening the cabin door that it happened. The ship gave a sudden lurch, and then, before he could regain his balance, came the terrific explosion that sent him sprawling. The air was filled with the sound of escaping steam. Alarm bells began to go off. Excited people ran screaming from their cabins as the boat gave an awful shudder, and another explosion rent the air. Dazedly, he staggered to his feet and fought his way to the cabin. At the door, he met the others as they tumbled through it. Henry had a small package under his arm. A gasp of relief escaped him. The treasure was still intact. The four of them, still dazed from the suddenness of the explosion, beat their way to the deck. There all was confusion. A passing officer explained that the casualties were terrific, barely 100 people left alive. He ordered them to the nearest lifeboat and hurried off. There was another lurch as the sinking boat began to go down more rapidly. How they did it, they never could explain, but an hour later, the four found themselves adrift in an open lifeboat, alone on the gray Atlantic. They had a vague recollection of one last violent upheaval as the huge liner had broken up and gone down with the crew still struggling to launch the lifeboats and passengers leaping into the sea by the score. Apparently, they were the only ones left from all that vast crew and immense passenger list. It was too stunning to comprehend. Day after day passed as they drifted aimlessly on what seemed a never-ending expanse of water. The morning following the tragedy, they had sworn a pact to reach shore together with their precious burden or die in the attempt. The lockers of the little boat were crammed with provisions, cans of drinking water, blankets, everything needed to help them on their desperate journey. Surely, sooner or later, they would be picked up. Confidence ran high. But now, on the morning of the 12th day, they began to wonder. Altair stared moodily into the water and let his thoughts drift back to the curse. It couldn't be yet. He shook his head to drive the thought away. Sheer nonsense. This was no time to let himself be cowed by fear of a silly superstition. At noon, they got the shock. The food and water were almost gone. If they weren't picked up soon, they would be claimed by death. Months of hardship and backbreaking labor, a fortune in their hands, and then death in the limitless expanse of a grim sea? None of them said anything. Each sat occupied with his own thoughts, expressionless, staring at the rising and falling ocean. Once again, Altair's mind returned to the ancient curse. Vainly he tried to shake it off, but to no avail. Then hour after hour, death came closer and closer, and he began to secretly plot. One of them could last a long time on the provisions that were left. Surely with that extra lease on life, he would be picked up. Then there was the treasure. He'd have it all to himself. Secretly, he felt for the gun hidden in his shirt, touched the knife in his belt. Why shouldn't he be the one to survive? Hour after hour he brooded, and by evening he had made up his mind. He would kill the others and get the water, food, and jewels for himself. Altair watched as the others divided the food for the evening meal. Suddenly the thought came that every scrap of food meant added life for himself. In a frenzy, he whipped his gun from his belt and faced the three. None of them moved but sat staring at him with taut, tense faces. Then as he pulled the trigger, they leaped into action. The speeding bullet brought one of them up short. With a grunt, he dropped to the bottom of the boat, never to move again. Altair laughed hysterically as he whirled on the other two, who were rushing at him like bull elephants. Again the gun barked, and the second of his comrades dropped in his tracks. Only Henry was left. As his finger tightened over the trigger again, Henry was at him. Instantly they were locked in an embrace of desperation. Grimly they wrestled. Once more death stared him in the face. His fear gave him superhuman strength, and with one tremendous effort, he hurled Henry from him. Back, he stumbled until with a crash he fell against the rudder. Like a cat, he was on his feet. With one motion, he yanked the rudder from its socket and raised it. That was Henry's last motion. The crack of the gun and Henry's scream blended together. Then he slowly toppled backward into the ocean, the rudder still clutched in his hand. Altair had won. The jewels, food, and water were his. In utter exhaustion, he collapsed beside the dead bodies of his former comrades. With monotonous regularity, the days slipped by as Altair, alone on his tiny ship of death, eked out his meager existence on the remaining provisions. Then came a day when there were none left, and opposite the gaunt creature that was once a man sat the grinning specter of death. Still more days went by, and Altair realized he was slowly dying. All hope was gone. True, he had eked out a few more miserable days of existence, but for what? He had murdered the 3 men in the world he once would have given his life for. And for what? Jewelry you couldn't drink, wealth you couldn't eat. Painfully, he slipped off the seat and began to drag himself toward the parcel. With his last remaining strength, he pulled himself across to the tiny packet. His mind, half crazed from starvation and fear, envisioned it as a living thing. He had but one thought: to wreak vengeance on the treasure that had brought him disaster. At last he reached it and with claw-like fingers grabbed at it. Raising it above his head, his arms came forward to throw the evil thing into the ocean. Abruptly he stopped. Was he going out of his mind? Heading straight toward his tiny boat was a majestic liner. For a moment Altair could not comprehend what he saw. Then with a choked cry of joy, he ripped his tattered shirt from him and began to wave it frantically. Curse, was there? No curse was going to wreak its vengeance on him. At the last second, help was in sight. Straight for him the huge ship came. Altair, waving his tattered rag, knew he was safe. Nearer and nearer it steamed. Aid was close at hand. Suddenly he was aware that something was wrong. They hadn't seen him. The boat was bearing down on him. He had to get out of the way or he'd be smashed to splinters. Throwing down the rag, he staggered to the stern. Then with dawning horror, realization came upon him. There was no rudder. Henry had taken it to his watery grave with him. Utterly numb, he watched the monstrous bow of the liner towering over him. Relentlessly, it came closer and closer. As it loomed over his head, he gave one last scream of terror. There was a crunching, cracking noise, and the tiny boat disappeared forever. Majestically, the liner sailed on its course, leaving only a few splintered boards in its wake. At that moment, a hollow laugh could be heard resounding over the ocean as if from the tomb.